Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios, broadcasting as ever from the lovely Atlantic beaches, the last free state in America, Florida. Joining me down the coast is Andrew Gutmann, coming to us from Palm Beach County. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, I reached out to you as both of us who are native New Yorkers who sadly had to flee the crumbling Empire State. Maybe you could give my listeners a bit of a sense of kind of your background, the phenomenal letter you wrote in response to something that you saw, and kind of where that's taking you.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, we're political refugees like yourself from New York City. Never thought we'd actually leave New York City prior to 2020. But my daughter was at a prestigious private school called the Brearley School, an all-girls K-12 school, considered really probably the best all-girls school in the country, one of the best K-12 schools in the country. And she had been there since kindergarten, was very happy, had done very well both academically and socially. And then the summer of 2020 happened. George Floyd, BLM riots. There were these Instagram and social media accounts, a campaign called the Black @ campaign that had alums of various elite private schools. Brearley was one of the first to have one of these social media accounts where these alums aired their grievances, Black alums aired their grievances of what they thought were racist incidents, mostly some more recent, some many, many decades ago. Long story short, after that summer of 2020, everything about the school changed. The mission of the school changed, and we can talk a lot more about that if you want. It became an anti-racist school, adopted what we now call critical race theory, abandoned academic excellence, free speech in the classroom. And we let our unhappiness with that be known to the administration. We spent the year, I did at least, trying to get other parents to speak up about that. And again, this is 2020. This is COVID time. Nobody's getting together. No one's allowed in the school. But we were unsuccessful completely getting other parents to speak up, even though I believe very confidently that more than half of the families were very unhappy with this mission change.
Right.
And when re-enrollment contracts came out in the spring of 2021, I said, you know what? Someone's got to do something. We decided this was no longer a place for our daughter, which was not my decision or my wife's decision, was really my daughter's decision, because she realized this was not the school it had been. This was not the kind of education that she wanted or deserved. There were a number of incidents, not just the obvious, CRT or gender-related incidences, but where, free speech was really shut down in the classroom. So this was a family decision not to re-enroll her. And again, I said, you know what? Somebody's got to try to do something. Somebody's got to try to light a fire here because no other parents are speaking up. And I wrote a letter and I mailed it to all 656 families of the school, never expecting it to be read by any other than those 656 families. Right. And as they say, it went viral. Tucker Carlson read the letter on TV. I was on the cover of the New York Post that weekend. And that letter helped ignite what became, the fight against woke education and this national parents movement. Again, this is the spring of 2021. Right. And I have been sort of involved in that parents movement, that grassroots parents movement ever since. And then we did finally give up on Manhattan. We moved down to Florida, to Palm Beach County. And I spoke about what I just spoke about here, what had happened to Brearley and what's going on in our education system nationally. And I spoke at the Republican headquarters here in Palm Beach County to a group of very politically active women that call themselves the Fire Breathers. And they said, you need to run for office. Would you please run for Congress here? And they started introducing me around. And so I am running as a Republican for Congress here in Palm Beach County, District 22, to unseat a longtime Democrat incumbent. We can talk about that too, if you like. So that's sort of my life. So my life of being in this parents movement has now morphed into something I never expected to do, which is running for political office.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And I've got to say that I've had a fun and interesting life, and I've been lucky enough to meet people across the spectrum who do interesting things, including kings, which are highly overrated, and a bunch of political leaders. But I'm always most proud and chuffed to meet people who have graced the cover of the New York Post. That's always my favorite category of person. I envy you, and someday I too hope to outrage public sensibility enough to enjoy that honor. So
I'll tell you two really quick funny stories about that. One is the Post contacted me. I mailed the letter on a Wednesday. and it hit people's mailboxes on Friday. And then I had messages on my every phone number I've ever had and every email address I've ever owned. Every show on Fox wanted me on, and of course the New York Post wanted to write a piece, and I didn't expect this to happen, and I didn't know really what to do about this, and I said yes to the New York Post, and they sent a photographer, and they said it'd be in Sunday's paper, and then so my dad calls me. This is Sunday morning, and said, I got the New York Post. He goes, I said, am I in it? I didn't know. He goes, yes, you're on the cover. I said, okay.
Was he as proud of you as I am?
I think so. I think so. But honestly, we were a little bit kind of concerned about safety. I got a couple of nasty emails and reporters showing up at our house and stuff like that. So it was that first 4 or 5 days was very, very strange.
Tumultuous.
And we didn't sleep for kind of 4 or 5 days. It was really, really crazy. Again, never ever expected this to happen.
No, but and thank God you did it. And part of what I find so fascinating is that I've got 3 kids, and I read them repetitively, no matter what they wanted to read when they were kids at bedtime. At least twice a week, I worked in The Emperor's New Clothes. Right from the beginning, I worked this in, and so luckily, I've got 3 very smart kids who they can have their own political opinions, but what they are uniform in is calling out nonsense when they hear it, right? And this I'm curious to hear all of it's all wrapped together, and what I find so fascinating is I've got a lot of family in Northern Italy. I was getting the statistics out of the National Institutes of Health in January and February of 2020. And reading these statistics, the average age of death is 89 for men, 90 for women for this Wuhan flu, which was the original name, and I will never stop calling it that. And they all had pre-existing medical conditions. And I'm reading this as our politicians are clamoring to shut the economy down for no reason, and thinking, I'm sorry, am I missing something? Like being 90, catching a virus and dying used to be called life. We're ruining children's lives, right? And so at least in Florida, though we shut the schools down for about 6 weeks at the end of the year, and then there was a lot of fight in the summer of 2020 about, especially the teachers' unions, led by Randy Weingarten, who wanted to, keep the schools shut. The parents here were like, that's insanity. We're not doing that. That's ridiculous. You don't want to send your kid to school? They can learn virtually. Like, enough of this crap. So at least in Florida, we missed a lot of this. And so when I saw people fighting back, especially the education front, the very fact that the American left, broadly speaking, Lenny Bruce, like they fought for the ACLU, they fought for the right of free speech. They defended Nazis to march in the streets. What is your perception living in Manhattan? How did normal Democrats become Marxists overnight? It seems like.
Yeah.
What do you think happened?
Well, so that's a broad question. Let me address sort of the COVID issues too, since you brought them up, which is we were fighting the school on the COVID restriction issues before we were fighting on the what we'll call the woke or CRT issues.
Right.
When we actually kept our daughter home that whole school year. Not because we were worried about the virus. I thought that the restrictions in the school, so we had every intention of sending her back in person because they closed, March, the day before, 2 days before spring break, March, 11th or 12th of 2020, they closed. And I said, they will not reopen this year. I told people because they sent them home with like Chromebooks or something. And people looked at me like I was crazy. I was like, they will not be back this year. Right. And it turns out they were not back this year. We then went to Hawaii. That's another kind of funny story. We flew to Hawaii on March 13th. We're supposed to stay 2 weeks. We made it 1 week as they were closing everything down there. Okay, that's another kind of funny story. But back to the schools. Then, Labor Day, we're getting closer to Labor Day. And right before the opening of school, they do a Zoom about the COVID restrictions. And masks, obviously, but, they had to be 6 feet apart, but they didn't have enough room in the classroom, which meant half the kids are in a classroom, half the kids are in another room watching the teacher on TV.
Madness.
they're not allowed to talk at lunch. They're eating outside. They can't take the elevator. And where my daughter's grade was on the 12th floor, they had to walk up. And so we said, you know what, as bad as remote school is, and I thought it was awful. Yeah. Although my daughter's school did as good of a job as they could with it, remote school. But as bad as it is, I thought her mental health was worse being a prisoner in the school. They were talking about, what are the penalties if you touch your mask kind of thing. And I refused to send her with a mask. I refused. And so we actually kept a remote. We were fighting these issues. We got kicked out of we didn't get kicked out, but the reason we actually left Manhattan is we started to get fined over not wearing masks in an empty lobby. $500 a pop.
Madness.
And madness. So that's actually when we left Manhattan, is because they started finding us. I mean, it was absurd. We were, it was awful living in Manhattan at that point.
Yep.
And we were done. By April, New York City was done.
Right.
We had our big wave. You had all the deaths lag about a month after infections. Yep. We came back from spring break. Effectively, it was done. And that was before even anything shut down, and before the masks and before the lockdown. So it was miserable. Like, we were the only ones, walking around the Upper East Side without a mask, getting mask shame. Then I'd be fighting back with people. It was
the couple of times that went to Manhattan during that time, it was nuts. I mean, I told my wife when I was flying, I said, I'm going to be the guy on TV being wrestled by the TSA.
Me too.
I refused. Right. I refused to wear nonsense.
So we didn't fly. We didn't fly commercial also for a year and a half, because I would have been on that no-fly list. There's no question.
Yeah,
we got kicked out of a park.
Because once, out of like 20 trips through airports, once in Atlanta, a TSA agent said to me, and everyone else around me is wearing a mask. Madness. Yeah. And I'm walking along, and the TSA agent says, "You need a mask." And I said, "Oh no, I have an IQ exemption." And he just looked at me, and that was it. And most of the planes I got on, some of them were Nazis about it, but most of them were like, it was so infuriatingly stupid watching. And but you lived it. You lived in the belly of the beast. Manhattan.
I wrote a piece.
Crazy.
Yeah, I wrote a piece on masks where I looked at the very first piece. It was published in the Lancet, funded by the World Health Organization. This was in, I think, around June of 2020. It was like the first real academic piece that made the case for masks. It was a meta study. And I read this, I'm like, this is crap. And so what it was a meta study of 29 other studies. And I'm looking, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So what I did is I actually pulled all 29 studies. I got 28. One of them was in Chinese. I couldn't get it in English, but I got 28. And I went through all of them. Yeah. And there were errors in every single one, these studies that shouldn't have been in. And I wrote this and, hoping to try to get it published. And it got in a couple of places, but it got no traction, because at that point, the whole medical establishment, the whole political establishment just embraced masking for, the stupidest reasons. And so I realized kind of we lost this fight, on all these issues. And I was, go back to your question of New York City, how did it happen? I was then, and still am now, even more maybe now, disappointed in, my fellow New Yorkers, high IQ, Ivy League educated, the city that never sleeps, supposed to be resilient. Right. And they almost to a T completely caved on these issues, completely not understanding what freedom is. And it's so sad. And this is one of the things, when my letter then happened, and, we had people support us mostly quietly, because they're still so afraid to speak out on the education, the CRT issues, but not on the COVID issues. My original draft of the letter that I wrote actually talked about some of the COVID restrictions. And then I realized I'd lose everybody if I included it in there. So I took that stuff out.
I think it's Stockholm syndrome. They can't even admit to themselves that they allowed the state to ruin their children's lives. They just can't admit it to themselves.
They cannot. We had one family, friends that a Brearley family, that son, who was I think 16 at the time, was in the hospital for 3 weeks with a heart issue, with myocarditis, right after he got a vaccine.
Yep. And
still, they wouldn't put two and two together. They said, "Well, how could you not be vaccinated? We did it to save your life. You're not doing it to save our." Your kid almost died.
Yeah, we're taking this non-vaccine. Yeah, absolutely madness.
So how did this happen in New York City? They managed to terrify people. Partly our education system has sucked for 2 generations. Yep. So people don't don't know anything. I mean, they're used to reading the New York Times, which, which went full in on all these COVID restriction issues, obviously. And just people don't have the courage to speak. Look, I get it that people will lose their jobs, and we're afraid of losing their jobs, certainly afraid of losing their social circles, getting kicked out of private schools for speaking up on these issues. But
they also fundamentally don't understand statistics. I mean, that's part of the issue.
Well, that's true too.
I got as you said, you went and looked at these 28 studies.
Yeah.
I lost a lot of friends and colleagues over this madness because I just refused. Right, this to me is a bright line issue. When people are telling you lies and are forcing you to accept lies, that's Leninism. That's the point of Maoism, to make you say things that are not true. And this guy that I sat on an advisory board of a data science company with happened to be an MD and the CEO of a publicly traded company. And he put on LinkedIn, of his own volition, he didn't have to put this out there, here's a study that proves mass work. I read the study. Yeah. It was an N of 42. It was self-reporting, right? And even then, the statistics didn't show anything remotely like what he was claiming. And I called him out, and I wrote a long essay about that on LinkedIn. And guess what happened? I got kicked off LinkedIn.
Yeah.
For pointing out that the study that he was purporting showed that mass worked, showed the exact opposite. The world, it's still gone nuts. People still don't want to admit this happened. But anyway, so you focus on the educational part, on this critical race theory, which by definition, for those who don't know, is by definition Marxist, started by Herbert Marcuse as a French Marxist philosopher. And now then Americans took it and adapted it and said, well, it's not just critical theory, now it's critical race theory too. But I'll leave it over to you.
Yeah, I have a broader I think that's right. I mean, you could go woke ideology. I just gave a speech on this on Friday, which I think is broad. Critical race theory is part of that, obviously. But what I think the woke takeover of K through 12 education, but it's obviously much broader than that. It's the woke takeover of almost every institution in this country. Higher education, federal government, the military, our corporate, Fortune 500 corporations, the medical establishment, the legal establishment. All have been taken over by this woke ideology. It is much more than just a belief in what a lot of people say, even on our side of these issues, much more than just a belief in, let's say, systemic racism, that, the institutions and laws of our country were set up to, to oppress certain people, and that we need equity to remedy that. That's how most people kind of define, woke. My view is that it is really much, much broader than that. It is fundamentally a rejection of America's founding Enlightenment values. Now, what are those values? Those are, and I kind of say there are 5 of those key values, which are, free speech. The woke absolutely reject, free speech in favor of, you can't be harmed by speech. Well, if you understand that, that's not a small carve out of free speech. That is the complete antithesis of free speech. So that's, number one. Free markets, capitalism would be number 2. I mean, if you really want to boil down what woke is, you call them Marxist. I would call it anti-capitalist. I mean, that's really more than anything else, and that extends to things like, the climate change cult. This is not really about climate change. This is anti-capitalist or anti-capitalism. Third, individual rights. They reject individual rights in favor of group rights. That includes things like colorblindness and meritocracy, which go under the rubric of individual rights. Fourth is objectivity, that there really is right and wrong, that there really is truth in this world, and that extends to things like that there are 2 biological sexes, which they obviously reject.
Basic reality, which no one thought was weird to contest as recently as 36 months ago.
100%. And if you read, you talk about Marcuse, if you read the foundations of the gender and trans ideology, which is the queer theory, which is even scarier than the CRT, it is explicitly objectiveness. It is that there are no truths in this world, that there is no right and wrong, that there is no truth. So it's really frightening. And then, the fifth, I think, value that, woke ideology rejects is, the purpose of democracy, which, the founding fathers, I think, correctly understood to be preserving freedom. They redefine democracy like they redefine almost every word that we colloquially, use. Democracy, equity, equality, human rights, fairness, justice, really all mean the same thing, which is equality of outcome or socialism or Marxism or communism. And that's effectively what they've done, is they've redefined all those words, including democracy, to mean, you call it Marxism, I'll call it, socialism or communism, but, equality of outcome. And it goes even worse than saying, every identity group needs the same outcome. What that would kind of be equity. What they're really saying, which, I'll extend to calling it justice, is that, well, white males or, heterosexual white males have run the world for 250 years, or at least run this country for 250 years. Therefore, for the next 250 years, it should be other kind of people running this country. I mean, that's really what they mean by, by equity and justice. So that is the ideology in my view. And I speak about this. I've written a lot about this. That has absolutely, infected not just K through 12 education, obviously, but just about every institution of this country. And it is terrifying. And, we finally woken up to this. But, that is the only reason really that I'm running for political office, is we've got to elect people that understand these issues. And I think very few do, and that are willing to, speak up and fight back on this. This is not a quick fix. The left, like you said, Marcuse, going back to the 60s, and the left marched through these institutions over many, many decades. We're going to have to do the same. It is not going to be solved in one, 4-year presidential cycle. It's going to take a generation, at least, if we're going to try to, reverse and have our own counter revolution. But we've got to start at least by, waking ourselves up and educating other Americans and electing leaders that actually understand this and are willing to fight for these issues. Because I think very few people fundamentally understand what is really going on and what is really at stake here. That's
awesome. I love your kind of fivefold definition of wokeness, and I would just add this for thought. And the reason I refer to it as Marxist is part of the whole program is the repudiation of religion and the hatred of family. And that kind of falls under individual rights and responsibilities, which they want to replace with collectivist, which are never adequate. Right? The whole point of justice, and like it or not, this nation was founded on Judeo-Christian Islamic principles, right? Individual rights and responsibilities before God, who is the ultimate arbiter of whether you've done right or wrong. There is no collective. There's no collective in that, right? All the law that we have in this country, which they want to get rid of, is individual. Did you commit murder? That's it. Don't care what color you are. Don't care what color your victim was. Not relevant. Not remotely relevant. And I would argue they began this creep through the institutions with things like putting in place hate crime legislation. It's insanity. The idea that if someone walks up to you and hits you in the head with a baseball bat just cause, versus they walk up to you and scream an ethnic slur first and then hit you with a baseball bat, makes the second assault worse, is ridiculous. So we can begin to see the logic of what they have tried to do, and they have succeeded. You're right, they have succeeded. The draft dodger generation hid out in the institutions. They never became men, sociologically speaking, by dodging their responsibilities, and they've enforced this infantile vision on the nation ever since. And this is the result, this complete madness.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, I've written a lot about this, and look, this woke ideology, there's no question it derives from Marx. What I've written about is the critical theorists starting in the 1930s, and then again in the 1960s, what they did is they updated it. They said, well, okay, Marx thought there's going to be a revolution. It's going to be, we need revolutionaries. Who is that going to be? It's going to be, the proletariat. It's going to be the workers that are going to rise up, and it's going to be a violent revolution. While the critical theorists came and said, well, we want that same revolution, but actually capitalism works, so it's not going to be the workers. They realized that by the 1930s. Exactly. We need another class of revolutionaries. Who should it be? Well, what about these minority identity classes, right? That can be the new revolutionaries, which is what happened. They also realized, well, it doesn't have to be a quick, violent revolution. It can be a slow takeover of the institutions, which is that march through the institutions. I think where, conservatives, a handful have spoken up about this in the last 60 years, but a lot of people said, well, this will never escape academia. Right. Okay. You've
Wrong
got these
again.
great, you've got these, they have draft dodgers, as you put it, that, when it became, university professors, but who cares? Because these people will never get jobs that take these classes. And what happened was that, well, no, actually all those people that got jobs in the grievance, that majored in those grievance studies and sociology and anthropology went and worked in, HR departments and DEI consultants, and now have taken over, from bottom up, taken over every institution. So yeah, I think 2020 is when we finally kind of broadly woke up, realized, oh shit, sorry,
No, go right ahead.
but
I just have
we're
to
in
laugh.
trouble here.
I just have to laugh briefly because
Yeah.
I was in the anthropology department of the University of Chicago, and what
Okay.
I found so funny was that there were a bunch of us. Even there, Chicago is still one of the last remaining rational universities, even though
Yeah.
it's still slipping a little bit there because
It's still of all the elite universities, it's the least worst.
It's the least worst,
Right.
but Barry Hussein Soetoro's footprint is still large there, sadly. But I remember in the anthropology department getting into an argument with this guy who later went on to found Occupy Wall Street, which annoyed me because I live near Zuccotti Park. So there's a trend of history for you. And we were talking once, and he's looking at me. He's basically a Marxist, and he's asking me like, why are you studying here? Because I come from a business background. I'm going into your business family. I'm going into business when I leave university. And I said, I'm sorry, you don't seem to understand the origins of anthropology. We're in the imperialist tradition when the governing governments wanted to understand how the people they ruled thought in order to get the most productivity out of them. Now, you clearly have taken something different from this, but that's what I take from it. The look on his face was priceless. That he thought he was talking to a fellow traveler, and in fact, he'd encountered the enemy.
That's funny. So my dad actually was in a PhD anthropology program. But I so I almost double majored in sociology, and sociology was maybe even more Marxist. Maybe now it's about the same. I refused to take the 10th class because I didn't want sociology degree on my permanent transcript. I was too embarrassed. But what I liked about it was arguing with every professor was Marxist, but you could argue with them, and you could argue with them back then. And I went to school in the 90s, and you could still get an A. You could still write truthfully what you felt, and they would still accept that and value that. And it's completely different today. Now you cannot do that. Now you say, anything that goes against obviously the prevailing thought in any department like that, in any good university, you're not going to last very long. So that's what's completely
insane.
changed.
And when it came time when I looked at the universities I considered when I was leaving high school and the one I chose, and my kids who are college age, I started back in 2020. I listed off the schools that I would not pay for. Yale Comintern, People's Republic of Harvard stand. Like, you could go there, go get loans. I'm not paying for commie indoctrination. Not happening. Luckily, they're making better choices, but like, I still have friends who are thinking, "Oh yeah, I know. I'm going to send the kids. Yale's still a good name." I wouldn't hire anyone out of Yale.
They can't. Parents, I speak about this all the time. Why are all these parents that know what's going on at a school like Brearley, they still have their kids there? They cannot get off that track. And the two things, they cannot get off the addiction to the status that it brings, and both at the K through 12 in elite schools, and obviously at the university level. And they cannot get off that track to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, or whatever elite university. They just cannot.
Which is insane, because when this because you moved, but I brought down the house at a dinner in New York a few years ago. So when I moved from Manhattan to America, I found out that I meet people of all walks of life and many of those who chose to go to college, and found out amazingly you can get a phenomenal education pretty much anywhere. And the quote unquote status that comes, all of that is eroding rapidly, right? Just like the good old boys club. And the fact that the WASP wouldn't let the Jews into banking, and that created Goldman, Salomon Brothers, right? Things change. Nothing is static. And while you can still get a good education at Yale if you try real hard and study the hard sciences, the bulk of it's nonsense, and people know that. So for what prestige is left, nothing's constant in this world.
No, but it'll take time. And fewer kids are getting in from good K through 12 schools, unless you're diverse, or obviously, diverse. I think it's going to get even worse after, affirmative action was decreed illegal. Becomes even more subjective, less objective, more schools getting rid of SATs.
Right.
They're all, my alma mater, which I wrote about, has a new essay prompt. I forget what it is exactly, but something that clearly indicates your race or what you're gonna, because they can't ask, explicitly about it anymore.
Right.
But it'll take a while for parents to realize that these institutions aren't what they were. But again, the status of them, and this is a broader issue than just in obviously education, but the addiction to status and credentials is tough to.
It's tough to break,
tough
right?
to change.
In some ways, I don't. No, I do blame people for not being clear thinking about it. I mean, I especially look at folks like Mike Rowe have been writing about. There are 5 million unfilled jobs right now. If you want to be a welder, guess what, kids?
Yeah.
You go to welding school for 7 months, you're making $140,000 a year, right? That sounds a lot better than studying comparative whiny victimhood at Yale for 4 years and ending up $200,000 in debt and getting a marketing job for 35 grand. Just to say, compare.
Yeah.
I think that evolutionary shift and that change, right? I always laugh at just the idea of the Rensselaers and the Skimmerhorns and the Roosevelts who founded New York, and like they just retreated behind their gated communities 100 years ago, and they haven't peaked out again. Like the world changed, everything changed around them, and that's fine. But sorry, that's a bit of a divergence. So why particularly did you choose the seat that you're running for in Palm Beach County?
So I'm running in what is District 22. It's still a Democratic district, and I'm running as a Republican. But it is a long-term entrenched incumbent. Her name is Lois Frankel. She is reportedly Nancy Pelosi's best friend. She is well hated by many people here, as progressive gets. I mean, member of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, and Florida generally, and you probably know this, has changed dramatically in the last 3 years. The demographics at the state level, we were as purple gets. Going back really to the last presidential election. I think now it's about, at last statistic I saw, something like plus 560,000 Republican voters now, projected to be about 1 million by Republican voters ahead by the election in 2024. And similarly, it's what's happened in Palm Beach County. Palm Beach County was bluer, obviously, than most other counties, not as blue as Broward County. But the same kind of demographic changes have happened with people like us, moving down from places like New York City. Everyone was worried about, people like us bringing our liberal politics down, and it's been exactly the opposite.
Yeah,
it is
the ones who are likely to leave are drawn to things like, I don't know, freedom, low taxes.
Exactly. COVID obviously was a big part of that. And so you've got dramatic shifts in demographics. What you also see is registration changes, which is really interesting. You're seeing about 2 to 1 in our district, people giving up their Democratic registration to go independent, or what we call MPA here in Florida, as Republicans are switching. So you have a lot of people that are completely fed up with how crazy, they're not ready to go red, but they realize how crazy and insane, the Democratic Party has become on issues like, biological males and girls sports, on how anti-Israel, the Democratic Party has become. So you have a lot of people switching. And so this seat is winnable for the first time. Not easy to win. And the key to winning this is you've got to win what is a dramatically growing number of independent voters. That's how you win this. Now, DeSantis won Palm Beach County. That was the first time a Republican governor had won the county in almost 40 years. And so this is really winnable for the first time. You also have Mar-a-Lago's here, which is interesting, obviously, for a number of reasons. Palm Beach has become the Republican fundraising capital of the world. So every politician is coming here to fundraise. And you have that community that is overwhelmingly excited about getting rid of this very progressive, very hated incumbent. And so we've done really, really well here. Fundraising, enormous amount of enthusiasm. And I'll add one more piece to the answer to your question, is why run in this district, which is we live in downtown West Palm Beach. I really believe it, not overnight, but in a generation, West Palm Beach can be the financial capital of the United States.
Oh,
Because
easily.
as New York City, continues to deteriorate, which sadly, and I say that very sadly, I don't see that reversing or stopping. The number of financial services firms that are moving down to, it's obviously it's all of Southeast Florida, as well as some of the West Coast like Tampa, but most of these CEOs and hedge fund and private equity guys want to live in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
And so
people
you see
forget
enormous
that everyone in Greenwich, Connecticut became the hedge fund capital of the world. It became the hedge fund capital of the world because Connecticut had no income tax.
Yeah,
People forget that, right? But
that's right.
Connecticut then leveled up to become as stupid as New Jersey and New York.
Right. So everybody's moving down here.
Yeah,
I mean, I can't, where it be they had a house here now for obvious reasons. They're here 6 months in a day, and it's their primary residence. And so you see enormous amount of financial services firm. I mean, Goldman Sachs is building a building here, bringing a lot of people down here in their asset management division. So there's from a long-term perspective, and it's not a guarantee. You've got to keep West Palm Beach is still sort of progressively managed. I mean, Democratic mayors and stuff. So you've got to not let what's happened to West Palm Beach, which is obviously not a major city like New York City or San Francisco, but you've got to not let what's happened to every other big city of the United States happen here. You've got to keep up with the infrastructure and everything. You have to have affordable housing, but there's an opportunity to really be one of the major cities of the United States here, and for kind of the whole Southeast corridor from Miami up to Jupiter at least, and even further north, maybe where you are. To be this really dynamic economic region of the United States. And I think
this is booming because we're here, right? I mean, we're right south of Cape Canaveral. So this is aerospace central, right? SpaceX and, quietly the Economic Development Corp here has been bringing, Embraer and all these huge multinational aerospace companies here. Very quick. I mean, do you find things resonate? Like I've had this chat with a few Democrat friends, and of course, the media tries not to play it up, but like I watched the congressional hearings on government censorship, and every single Democrat started their remarks by demanding that Bobby Kennedy Jr. be not allowed to speak. Right. It was so hyper meta ironic that it was incredible. They all stood there and said, what he has to say is dangerous. You just proved, and the fact that the Biden administration still has not granted him Secret Service protection, which was created after his father was killed during a president. It's insanity what they're doing, and doing blatantly in front of people's faces.
Oh yeah,
that figure into what people talk about when you're out campaigning? Do they bring that kind of stuff up?
Well, the Republicans do for sure. I mean, obviously the free speech issues and the hypocrisy. I don't think the average Democrat understands that. Again, I think they see certain things that are absolutely crazy, like the gender and trans issues. I don't think they
men who came in 29th in their college race are now winning and becoming Woman Athlete of the Year.
Right.
That sort of madness. Right, which was a priority in day one of the Biden administration. Stop the pipeline and let boys compete with girls in sports. Those are the two priorities of the Biden administration. No disagreement. I saw that Bobby Kennedy, the RFK Jr. interview on the Tucker's, Twitter show, whatever you call it. It is crazy. But look, I mean, the hypocrisy. There's no bounds to the Democrats' hypocrisy on so many different issues. Look, this is, we talk, intellectual about where this, ideology comes from, but the liberals they've completely abandoned liberalism. Yes. Right. I mean, I still call myself a classical. I prefer to call myself British liberalism, right? Gone.
Yeah. I mean, I still prefer to call myself a classical liberal rather than a conservative. And I've written about that. In today's day and age, if you properly understand them, they're almost exactly the same. We can nitpick a little bit of the differences. Again, that's more of an intellectual.
But pretty much exactly the same. I had Harvey Silverglade, interrupt real quickly. Harvey Silverglade, who wrote the great book 3 Felonies a Day, that our legal system is so insane that the feds can put any one of us in jail anytime they want because the legal code has gotten so insane. And Harvey is a classic 1960s Harvard liberal lawyer. And when he was on my show, not an instant of daylight between us, right? Yeah. Free speech, no government control, abolish the FBI. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's right. But the mainstream Democrats, and certainly the party and the establishment, has completely abandoned free speech, completely abandoned what we would call liberalism, freedom. No, but I don't. I mean, to your question, does the average voter understand that? No, wow. I don't think they do. No.
And so New York Pravda does its best to hide that, and if it doesn't appear in the pages of Pravda in the Metro section,
well, that's right. If it doesn't appear, that's right. If it doesn't appear in the New York Times, which I still, I've read for almost 30 years now, and now I read online because I finally gave up the print. But it's important to see what they're saying. And as difficult as it is to read, and as little as I spend time with it, but I still kind of see what they're writing. No, if it's not in the New York Times, to these people, it doesn't count. It doesn't matter. And what the New York Times is saying is what counts and matters. And, to a smaller extent, CNN or NPR, people are still, listening to and watching. And that's why, the small number of independent journalists, the Barry Weisses of the world, Bill Maher's of the world, which, I think would call themselves in many ways, classical liberals, are reaching that. Look, that is the audience that I need to reach to win this election.
Yep.
That's exactly, how we win this election, and how you win. And frankly, I think nationally, how Republicans, if you want to talk, politics, I mean, how Republicans, if we're going to win national elections, you've got to get that independent voter. And I'm writing a piece on that. And it's a huge number now. I mean, more than 40%. Nationally, it was 29% in our district, up to about 32.5%, will be probably about 34% independent voter, but even bigger nationally. These are, in many ways, all those new independents are to some extent, they're sort of anti-Trump Republicans, but to a larger extent, they are people that have abandoned the Democratic Party. And they're winnable. And the only way we win the culture war is, and I think it has to happen politically, and you've got to win elections. And the only way to win elections is you've got to get that independent voter. I mean, again, that's how we win this election. And you've got to make the case that the Democratic Party has completely abandoned things like free speech.
Yeah, they've gone insane, and I can only attribute it to that basic, it's straight out of the Leninist Maoist playbook. And my favorite thing when someone tells me that I'm echoing Fox talking points when I say Marxism. I said, oh no, I studied Marx and read all of his works for 2 years with Marxist professors at the University of Chicago. I know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And the very, very fact that the way he started the revolution, right? Bolshevik, Menshevik. Menshevik means minorityite. Bolshevik means majorityite. And it's a lie. They called 6 people the majority and 1 billion people the minority. And they came out of the gate lying. And their point is, I have to make you echo things that you know are untrue in order to keep your job, keep your red ticket, keep whatever, keep your kids in the school you want. If I can force you to endorse things that you know are a lie, I have won. That's the Marxist approach, and that's the modern Democrat Party. The insanity of deplatforming and censorship and all the rest of it, crazy, absolute crazy. I was thrown off major platforms for citing CDC statistics.
No, I
quoted the CDC and I was thrown off major platforms for spreading medical misinformation. It's insanity. And my wife and rational people ask me, like, why do you bother to fight this fight? To me, this is critical. This is the soul of the country. This is not a joke.
Well, I would go further. I mean, it's Western civilization.
Yes.
We lose this, and we are losing. Make no mistake. I mean, we haven't. I don't think we've lost yet, but we are losing desperately. Thank God we finally woke up a little bit. But we lose this. We don't just lose this country. I think we lose Western civilization, and it is a fight that we have. I mean, that's the reason why I'm running for office, because we have to fight this fight. We have to. We have no choice for our country, for our children. For the future, to fight this fight, as difficult as it is, as unpleasant as it is.
As unpleasant. I'd rather do anything else. I'd rather run my business. I'd rather do a billion things than fight Marxist woke morons trying to destroy this country and steal it through a totalitarian takeover. I'd really rather do that. It'd be better.
Yeah.
I'd be more pleased to do that. And that's why I think arguably they have won for so long. Because if you are focused on doing something, and that clown Bill Ayers, I remember a good friend of mine went to high school with him. So they grew up together in the northern Chicago wealthy suburbs, right? If Bill Ayers' daddy had not been a rich insurance executive, Bill would still be serving a life in prison for weather underground bombings and attempted murder, right?
Yeah.
But instead, he became the teacher and trainer to Barack Obama, right? This is ideas matter. Ideas matter a lot. And that clown, if had he been poor, would have been one more kid who'd been clocked over the head by the cops in Chicago and would have died in prison. But instead, he went on to marry Elizabeth Dorn, and they went and infected generations of kids at the University of Illinois, and their scumbag son became the district attorney in San Francisco and ruined it there. Like, ideas matter deeply. And we have to counter bad ideas. And the problem is many people who are just trying to live their lives and believe in classical liberalism just think that if I just do everything right, the world will work out. But it won't. It will not work unless we fight.
That's right. No, and that's one of the advantages that the left has, is they are so much better at mobilizing people, and especially young people.
Yes.
To fight for these issues. And what do we want to do? We want to live our lives.
Yeah.
Right. This is always the downside of classical liberalism or libertarianism. We just want to live our lives and raise our families and do what we do and make money and whatever. We don't want to get involved in these things, but at this point we have no choice.
You have to.
You absolutely have no choice. And it's tough because I've spent 2.5 years trying to get parents across the country to come, stand up and
pay
push
attention.
back.
First off, pay attention.
Yeah. And it's tough because you've got to explain. I mean, if you haven't read Marx, you got to go. Yeah, it's very hard to explain to the average parent or the average American what this ideology really is. They kind of know, their spidey sense, okay, something's not right. And especially when it gets into
they know the Soviet Union collapsed and Cuba's a nightmare. That's kind of all they know. They don't really know why.
Yeah,
North Korea is such a hellhole. Right.
And that's what, we've done such a poor job. I mean, education generally, but, I've argued this too. Everyone says we don't teach civics, which to some extent is true. The most important thing we should be teaching in civics is probably not, 3 branches of government and checks and balances. It's the dangers of communism and Marxism. I wish that was what was really taught, because then it would really wake people up. But again, we haven't had, people learn this in 2 generations. So we don't know how bad, what is coming down the pipe is, because people just don't know the history of it.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, I'm delighted at what you're doing, and I'm so happy that your letter sparked a mini revolution, at least woke people up, and as and again, pure envy. New York Post cover. Can't wait for something to happen that hopefully positive, not negative. That puts me on the cover of the Post. Any last final thoughts for people?
Well, I'll tell you the other funny story about the Post, which is what someone introduced me right after it happened to a crisis manager, right? PR guy, crisis manager, and he knew the story. And the only thing he said to me is, usually people call me before they're on the cover of the New York Post, so I can prevent that, not after the fact. There isn't a whole lot I can do for you now.
Right, it's already happened.
Which was fine. It already happened. God, that's but no, I appreciate the opportunity to be on. Obviously, we're like-minded in what has to get done here in this fight, and what the root issues of what's happening to our country. But we need more people to stand up and understand it and speak up and fight and elect good leaders that are willing to fight this. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
Amen. I'm sorry I can't vote for you, but I will encourage all those in the county to do so. So
I appreciate that. And obviously a lot of it's fundraising, so anybody that wants to contribute, AndrewGutmann.com, 1 T 2 N's is the website. Check me out.
Well, I'll put that down. I'll put the link down below. So again, thanks so much. And to my listeners, I will end as I normally do, and with extra punch, given today's guests, that you should turn off the mainstream media who are lying to you and tune into Messy Times.
Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.